Hello, everyone, and thanks for taking time to join this session. It's a pleasure talking to you all on this platform provided by Creatio. If you look at the year 2020, the short-term borrowings, or what is called as the buy now, pay later, the new kid of the block when it comes to retail lending, has done about $97 billion of business. That's expected to rise twofold in terms of market share over the next 2 years. Another example of what's been happening the last year or so is the amount of funding which is done for green and sustainable finance. For example, the worldwide debt to sustainable finance is about $730 billion. Now, definitely there are changes what we are witnessing as part of the retail lending business. And these changes can be perhaps said is out of the watershed year of sorts which has happened during the pandemic. While we can look at these new realities, the question we ask is, will we be able to predict what are the future changes very precisely? Can we predict them? It will be very difficult to do so. However, I think there is significant knowledge what we have in terms of what's been happening to at least predict what kind of patterns of changes we will witness in the near future when it comes to retail lending. So we'd like to see what those pattern of changes are. And once you know what those patterns of changes are, we should be also able to see what kind of responses we can do. Again, in terms of patterns, how we can look at how we need to respond to it. First, understand this. Let's understand what are the realities today. What are the new realities which we witness in this retail lending business? Broadly speaking, one, it starts with the customers. The customer behavior is changing, but more importantly, the customer segmentation is changing. And how does the segmentation manifest? Typically, we look at segmentation in terms of demographics. But I think today it's more of psychographics which define segmentation. Typically, the millennials and the generations post that who are digitally native and who are also savvy, financially savvy, we think of them as a different segment. But the generations before that, primarily Gen X, for example, they have adopted digital, and hence their behavior also is changing. So demographics is not going to be the criteria, it's going to be psychographic analysis. So behavior is going to define how we're going to segment customers. And that behavior is going to continuously change. So examples of such behavior are, you see more and more of auto sales, auto loans being given to people who are looking at it more as a usage rather than ownership. We have seen in the past few years, short-term borrowing significantly rise. So this trend will kind of continue in terms of customer behavior. The other thing what we also witnessing is the blurring of industry lines. We see more and more industries coming into finance. For example, you see edutech offering services, and they offer also many of these payments to be done on a multiple payment basis. So they're also looking at lending to small customers for whatever small service, small ticket line items are. Similarly, you see OEMs and retailers have always been looking at how they can fund customers. So industry lines are blurring, and it is possible today that anybody from any other industry can look at lending specifically to consumer businesses. And the business of banking has predominantly been on information. And today, the retail lending industry is more a technology-based industry rather than a banking industry. Like you've seen a lot of tech companies getting into retail lending. Technology and information becomes the key for running the retail business. You can actually put together all of the different components required for that for the retail business using various technologies. The other thing what we also have seen in the last couple of years is sustainable lending. There's a lot of focus and consciousness within the bankers and the lenders to look at sustainable lending and financing inclusive projects as one of the means for at their corporate responsibility, but has also become a part of their central strategy as well. Lastly, we also look at certain events. If you look at the past 2 decades in this century, I think there have been significant amount of churn in the industry, driven by certain events. For example, the dot-com, the beginning of the century, the 2008 great global financial crisis, and now the pandemic. They're all different events which happen. What is the new reality looking like? Is there different events which will happen in the future? The answer is yes. We would not know what is the nature of the event. There could be a black swan event where you really cannot predict what is going to come up, or what is now being called as gray rhino events. These are events which are very common, big, hovering around the corner. It will happen to you. So these events will happen, and it is for us to be prepared for such events. How do we build resilience in such events which happens in the future? So broadly, these are the new realities which are striking the retail lending industry, and we need to see how we can help harness the advantages as well as deal with some of these risks. So if you look at the strategies primarily to deal with this new realities, broadly the strategies are: one, from a business design perspective, how can you look at your business models? How can you build new business capabilities? How can you harness ecosystems? And from an execution perspective, how can you use data to build in some of the intelligence you want from an organization perspective? And since we are dealing with lending, there is also going to be a significant amount of risk which need to be addressed. So these are the broadly 5 strategies under which we will understand how we want to respond. Let's take this one by one. The first thing is in terms of business model. The business model primarily is: how do you target your customers? Who are your target customers? What kind of products and services do you want to position? What revenues do you expect from them? How do you structure your cost, the funding model? What competencies you may need to build? That's primarily the business model. And specifically in terms of strategy here, we're looking at embedded finance. What we call as embedded finance is trying to be there as a bank or a lender at a point when a decision is taken to buy a goods or service, which requires funding. So examples of that is your buy now pay later, where purchases are made, where you can be part of it. We talked about the edutech, where you can fund businesses, students who want to take in loans for certain courses. You can look at OEMs who are actually now directly reaching out to customers to sell their cars, electric vehicles particularly. So that's where we're looking at how to embed as part of the customer's journey where the finance is embedded. While we do that, reimagining the functions, the business functions will be critical. That is simplifying the process and getting into instant decision. This is very critical today, and I think more and more banks are able to achieve this capability. And at the same time, is what kind of products and services do you think will be relevant? Today, we are talking about short-term borrowing, or what we call as buy now, pay later, green loans. Tomorrow, the new reality will be a new set of products. The idea is to be prepared for these new products and how business agile you are. So here are specific certain strategies which we talked about from a business model perspective. The ecosystem, while banks and lenders can execute business based on their capabilities, there's only so much they can do. If they're able to harness the capabilities from the ecosystem partners, they'll be able to do much more. Today, if you look at the products, buy now, pay later, every bank in the globe talks about it. The differentiation is hardly there from a product perspective. What banks can do as from a differentiation perspective is build in differentiated customer journeys. And that's where the ecosystem comes in, wherein you can actually create customer journeys which are very specific for a customer. And take the example of electric vehicles. While we want to take electric vehicles and businesses to fund them, we're also looking at how can you create an ecosystem so that the adoption of the electric vehicles improves by putting together a set of charging stations. The bank can partner with power companies to build this kind of infrastructure. So you're looking at extending the journey not just within the financial business, but also beyond the banking space to look at how else can you fulfill the overall purpose of the customer? Other instances where ecosystem can really help is how can you drive operation excellence? For example, KYC today, there are a lot of fintechs like Tink and Plaid, which gives you this capability for KYC, which can be much more agile and more up to date rather than doing it internally. Those are capabilities you can definitely borrow from the external world and hence improve your operational excellence. The third strategy is in terms of building cognitive insights, where we all understand AI and explainable AI today being predominantly looked at strategies to build a cognitive insights and a cognitive enterprise, which we feel is definitely a way to go. But there are significant amount of changes in terms of how this has to be adopted. One is these insights has to be real time and it has to trigger real-time actions. Anything beyond real time will make these insights be inactionable, right? And hence, driving real-time insights and driving real-time actions becomes important. And the problem which we also seen in many of the organizations while building AI is the data, the kind of data infrastructure which is there, and creating that data lineage and infrastructure and creating the granular level of data across the value chain is what is important. And creating that infrastructure is key to deliver on any of these things to do with AI. Lastly, we also look at AI more not just from a customer engagement perspective. How can you look at the full spectrum? Whether it's your workforce empowerment, how can you empower your sales force to better understand your customers and also their business? How do you manage your business performance and also assess the market? So this will help you understand the business as well as customers better. So what we're looking at is how can you execute your business based on the power of data rather than data lying passive. We're trying to put them together so that your processes are governed by insights. If you look at the way businesses build applications today, it's by and large in-house, it's by and large done by the technology teams. We're looking at how can you democratize this. So what do we mean by democratize? We're saying how can you build these capabilities by borrowing capabilities from outside. We talk about in the ecosystem. But that's where we're looking at as a service model. Can you borrow business services from outside the organization so that it's ready to be implemented? Can we build business services not just by the technology team, but other teams as well? And that's the primary goal of a no-code platform. So you want to now democratize, and so that you want to end up building business services rather than building applications. So the focus should be more on the business services. And while we do this thing, business services focused building of capability, what we will end up is building incremental capabilities. So we do not have to look at a transformation, large-scale transformation of 3 to 5 years, but you can start looking at building incremental capabilities which will lead to transformation over a period of time. And while we do this, also rapid proofing can be done of concepts, what we want to do. MVPs and fail fast approaches can be adopted. So democratizing and building this as a service model with a focus on business service will help us be much more agile. Lastly, from a strategy perspective, we're looking at risk management. How do you want to rewrite some of the rules in the way you have done managed risk management? One for sure is that there needs to be a recalibration of risk models, primarily because there is a change in the way historical data will behave post the pandemic. But more importantly is that richness of data, with more and more data coming in, we should be able to better model risks which are there. And a continuous recalibration of risk model based on the new availability of data will be the key. Also, from a control perspective, to manage the risk, what has always been seen as a second line of defense, we are now looking at how can you promote that to the first line of defense, embed them as part of the business functions, so that the risk control is more active rather being passive and post facto. And cybersecurity is always a concern today with the increased digitization. How can you strengthen your cyber defense will be one of the key asks from a future perspective. So we're looking at an adaptive way of building a risk management capability. So finally, putting all this together, we have these 5 strategies in terms of business model, harnessing ecosystem, cognitive enterprise, all of it leading to essentially business agility, building new capabilities, and having a focus on business services, uh, all of which are, I think, very native to a capability of a no-code platform. They give you the agility, they help you respond to business needs faster, they give you a flexibility to adopt to new things. So those are things which are very native to a capability of a platform for a no-code platform. And what we see as the 5 strategies will be hinged on the fact that these low-code platforms will be able to give you this. I want to conclude that with this session with this thought, saying that if you're looking at business agility, we need to look at wholesome from a perspective of planning, from a perspective of culture, and as well as technology build. I hope this session has been useful to all of you, and wishing you all a success in your journey with any of the low-code platforms, specifically Creatio. Thank you.